This will fix the case if you've got a high volume, if you've got a case where you're setting a lot of schedules in a high volume, the actuator agent would not scale nicely, and we fixed that. Consequently, there's also another change which is in develop now for scheduleless writes without schedules on the actuator agent. It's a new feature. It is on by default. If your agent has a usage pattern where the only reason it's creating a schedule is so it can write a point and then it immediately releases that schedule, there's no need to block off other agents from working with that device. You can now do that without actually scheduling a device. If you're doing a high volume of writes, and in fact this is what prompted the other actuator agent performance enhancements, if you're doing a high volume of writes in that circumstance where you just schedule, write a point, and then release, and you don't have to worry about you're not actually worried about restricting access to other devices, now you don't have to bother to create and remove the schedule. You can just write to the point. If another agent has the schedule, you'll still get blocked out of that like you should, but if you're in a circumstance where you just need to write to the point and you don't need to worry about reserving the device for a long period of time, now you can just do it. And when you're doing a high in a high volume situation, this dramatically improves the performance of the whole system. So that feature is in. The actuator agent enhancements for taking on lots of schedules is going to be in shortly. Craig just needs to review the pull request and get it into develop. Let's see. There have been a few improvements to various scripts on the system. Another pull request that is going to be in shortly is we've rewritten the pub subsystem and have integrated into the router. It now in our testing, scalability testing, it now runs about 4 times faster than the old pub subsystem. But that is a large, complicated change. I need to review it. Craig needs to review it. There's probably going to give some feedback to Shweta, who wrote it, and to get all the kinks worked out before we roll it into develop. We are eager to get that one in. It has been a long time coming, and it will greatly enhance the performance of the platform in a lot of circumstances.
I mean, people don't have to make any changes to.
Yeah.
This should be invisible, other than the performance improvement.
Yeah, we have made sure that the interface stays exactly the same. So yeah, that's exciting. And let's see, I can't think of anything else. Those were the big ones that I wanted to cover. I'm sure that Joe's going to talk about some UI stuff that that people haven't seen yet. So if that's not in the stuff that Joe and Craig showed today, if it's not in develop, it will be soon. Also, Bob Barkley mentioned talking about the charge point drivers if we have time. Those actually were merged into develop yesterday, I think is when I accepted that pull request. So there'll be a chance to talk about that too. But first we're going to talk about the tagging specification. Now, I am going to put a link up to a spec, but it's not the spec. The specification is being written by Chandrika. She's actually on vacation. She is in India. She will be in India until after Christmas. She did not quite get this to the point where she wanted it to be, so there are some open questions. There are some things that need to be changed, and we're putting it out here so we can get feedback. So I'm going to post that in the chat. And Olga's here, and she helped a lot with. She didn't write the specification, but she gave us the information we needed about Haystack and how we should integrate this Haystack using the Haystack tags for and helped us understand how we were going to integrate tagging into the platform. So the main feature, in fact, I think you need to make me a presenter, Jeremy, so I can share my desktop. Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, I just did it since you're Kyle guest, I guess. Oh, okay,
yeah.
You're calling from home. Yep.
I'm calling from home.
Okay.
Good times.
Yep.
Let's see, change desktop, and we'll share my primary monitor. And it should be, you should see it now.
Yep, I see it.
Excellent. Okay. I'll assume that that applies to everybody. Okay. So and I'm going to try and only talk about this on a high level, mostly because of time, and a lot of it is because like the APIs are still being hammered out. So the tagging service provides a way for us to unambiguously describe points, topics on the platform. So, for example, if you wanted to look for, I'm going to fall. We run the risk of falling back to examples that don't necessarily make sense. So I'm going to try and keep it to examples that do make sense. So let's say you have a point on a HVAC unit that represents the outdoor air temperature. With the tagging service, you would be able to put metadata onto that point that unambiguously describes it as something that describes temperature coming from outside, and that is on an HVAC unit. And Olga, if you want to jump in here with any other examples that would make more sense, feel free. And then the service would then allow us to query for tags. The idea is, one of the goals for VOLTTRON from the beginning was that agents be as autonomous as possible. And one of the problems that we run into is that agents usually require lots of configuration. And this is hopefully going to get us to the point where that's no longer, or it's less necessary. And so the ideal workflow would be for an agent to connect to the platform and then query the tagging service looking for points that have certain tags on them. So if an agent says I need outdoor air temperature, or I need zone temperature, or I need the zone thermostat setting, the tagging service provides an unambiguous way to describe those points, and then agents can query based on those tags and find out, like for instance, find out all of the HVAC units, find all of the VAVs in the system, things like that. And then when it has that information, it can do lots of the configuration on its own.
Exactly. And the other thing is that it can, as Kyle was saying, unambiguously know who its neighbors are, who do they belong to, where are they really located. There's also the other side of the user. If the user is trying to find information within the VOLTTRON database and they're not very familiar with where the data is coming from, they can do more generic keyword searches that will help them pinpoint the actual points that they're looking for.
Yeah, that's the goal. So a few of the things that one of the things that we are still working on is exactly how the querying is going to work. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Olga, but I believe that the Project Haystack itself doesn't tell you the best way to construct searches or how that is done.
No, Project Haystack is a very large project on communication, and they have their own communication system that they use. But what we're just borrowing are the tags. Those have been sought out by the community and approved by the community. They are changing and evolving, but it was a good place to start because we're kind of in the same space.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah. So that means that we have to come. So when it comes to how are you going to search for tags and how are you going to add them and remove them, that's still on us to work that out. Would that be a fair statement? Yeah, that would be a fair statement. Okay. So a couple of features of the tags are, well, one, they're known. All of the possible, there's a finite limit of possible tags, and they all have specific meanings. Tags can also include references to other objects, which allows us to establish a hierarchy between objects, or between, objects, I guess you would say, through their tags. So for instance, a point on an HVAC unit, the tags for that point would include a reference back up to the HVAC unit. So not only am I a zone temperature, I represent the zone temperature, I'm associated with this HVAC. And then once you follow that reference, you can get more information about that point, because there's this parent-child relationship that can be established through the references. And that's why figuring out how to query these nicely is we're still researching how we would like to do that, because we want to make it as simple as possible and intuitive as possible, so that you can type in it. And we're not saying this is exactly how we're going to do it, but for example, you could type in a query string, and we could unambiguously interpret that string and give you back what you're expecting. So for instance, one of the use cases we're working on is like, give us all the HVAC units in buildings that are greater than, have an area greater than 5,000 square feet. How would we write that query? Olga has been thinking about that. I've been thinking about that. We're still working on it. Although from our discussion before the meeting started, Olga seems to have made some progress. So we're going to discuss that after this meeting, and then eventually that will make it into the spec. There is stuff in the specification that talks about how to do queries. It's not set in stone. It was just a first attempt guess. Well, we could probably do it like this, but don't get bogged down in that. So, but the spec does include the high level features that should make it in. We're going to be able to tag individual components. We're going to the tags are the only allowed tags are in the schema. Tags can have. It would be incorrect to think of them as key value pairs, but some tags have a type, so that you could say like a temperature has a numerical value associated with it. Some tags are just markers where the object either has the tag or it doesn't, and some tags are references. And so you use those in combination to describe the object. Like, for instance, outside would be a marker for a temperature setting, or indoor or inside. I think it's outside and inside. Is that correct, Olga?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you would use those. So when you query, the kind of information you're going to be providing is things like area and then greater than 5,000 square feet, for example. Let's see. The tags will go into a database, but we're trying to avoid using some sort of like SQL style queries in order to get what you need. We want something that's a little bit more general than that. So if our tagging database, say, moves to Mongo, although that's not necessarily a good idea, but for instance, if it did, you would still use the same queries to get it out of this new database as you would out of the old one. Let's see. Tagging inheritance should be supported. Now this is not this statement right here is actually misleading, because tags are not inherited in the way that say that variables are or class members are inherited when you inherit from a class when you're programming. It's more of a by default, we would like to put a reference from device 1 back up to building 1, so that you can you can just establish the relationship through the tagging references. This does not mean that all of the tags that have been applied to building 1 will also show up in device 1. That is not what that means, and that's one of the things that we've been hammering out lately is making sure that we understand what these things actually mean. And this one will probably be reworded in the future so that it's easier to understand. And then,
a good way of explaining that one is let's say Kyle is putting a device into building 1 and I'm putting another device into building 1. There's no point for Kyle to tell me all the metadata about building 1 or myself. Building 1 may have already been created by someone who's more familiar with building 1, and we can just point to it. And so the inheritance comes from who do I belong to, or where am I located, or who is my parent, or who are my children. But it is not in the form of, as Kyle was mentioning, inheritance from a programming perspective. The properties of a building are very different than the properties of a device. So that's not what we mean by inheritance.
Yeah. One of the things that we might consider, Olga, and I'm just thinking out loud here a little bit, is maybe we don't actually have to explicitly include a reference from the device back to the building, because the relationship is implicit in the topic. So maybe we should say
we were trying to get away from the strict needing to understand the hierarchy that way.
Okay.
So I know VOLTTRON currently is set up, and I'm sure a lot of VOLTTRON systems are set up that way, but we didn't want to have that tightness.
Okay. All right. That's okay. That's good. I'd forgotten about that. So yeah, thank you.
No worries.
Yeah. So so in most cases, you would expect to see a reference from device to building 1. But the other thing that's nice about references is that they don't necessarily reference to parents. They can reference anything, and there's different kinds of references that you can use for different circumstances. Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. The other thing is we want to have a history of the tags for objects. So when a set of tags is changed for an object, you would want to specify, is this an update or is it a correction? And if it's a correction, then we don't worry about keeping a historical record of the previous state of the tags. If it's an update, say, oh, this has changed, here's the new tags for this now, then we save the old ones so that we can have a history of how this object's tags have changed over time. Let's see. When using, let's see. When users query for topics based on a tag, the results will respond to the current metadata is up to the calling application to periodically query. Okay, so what this means is that we are not going to do push notifications for tags. It is up to agents to periodically pull the system, or if some event triggers, like an error condition, this device no longer exists, or something like that. It's up to the agent to query, or for anybody who's using the tagging system, be it an agent or a user, to pull the tagging system for the new state of the tags after they've changed. This is not going to work like the config store, where the config store sends push notifications to agents for when a configuration changes. This is passive. Agents and users would need to just go and check periodically. Hopefully, and the hope is that we can make the query interface and getting agents to work with that, make it as seamless as possible, so that doing periodic updates is not that big of a deal. And then count and skip parameters for queries. Okay, so that's the high-level overview of the tags. That's what we're looking for. One thing that is not included in the spec is an example of what some tags would look like for a particular device, and we do have some use case examples here that I have not had a chance to go over yet, so I can't speak to how good they are. So, but it is up here. Like I say, it is incomplete. Chandrika was not exactly happy with it when she put it up, and so, any negative feedback will not be, nobody's going to get upset if you say, well, this is a terrible idea. Well, it's, there's already been a lot of back and forth about this, so
then that's why we're doing this, is to get some external feedback and validation. And
yeah, we want discussion. We want discussion so we can flesh this out. because I'm sure other people will look at this and say, wait, what about this circumstance, or how are we going to handle this, or how am I actually going to use it to do my something? And we want to hear about those so that the solution that we come up with works well for as many users as possible. Okay. And I think Olga has to go, and I don't really have anything else that we could discuss for this. If you go over it and you have questions, feel free to shoot an email to the VOLTTRON team, and we'll try and get back to you. And then we'll start compiling a list of things that Chandrika needs to go over when she gets back from vacation. And if we need to go over it sooner than that, we can do that too.
There's a comment on the.
I think Gabriel had a comment there.
Yeah, I was just seeing that. For abstracting the database implementation from the query, you guys might have thought of using Django or other pre-existing Python modules. Seems like something that's been solved in Python. So one of the things that we have to worry about when we come up with our query interface is that it has to be something that can be passed around via RPC call. And so that means that we can't just pass Python objects around. Now, so what that means is that whatever query we construct would have to fit, we would have to be able to break that query down and turn it into a Django style query. I guess and the other thing is Django is really a web framework, and its ORM is tightly incorporated into the web framework, and so so Django and specifically probably wouldn't be the best, because decoupling the ORM from the rest of the from what I've read, decoupling the ORM from the rest of the web framework is difficult, and we're not using Django for anything else, as far as I know. So maybe like SQL Alchemy or something like that would probably be a better solution. But there's still the issue of having to take something that can be represented via a JSON in JSON RPC. So basically, the basic Python data types, lists, and maps, and turning that into something that can be represented through SQL Alchemy. So there's still that step that we have to take in order to have it something that we can take from the user and present to the database. It is a good idea. Using some sort of ORM is probably a good idea. And that would probably be part of the process, but it still wouldn't eliminate the need to represent the query in something trying to get away from SQLite. There would still be work to do in that regard. SQL Alchemy is another object relational mapping that much like it's basically takes Python objects and they represent something in a database. And so when you change the object and call a commit method, it automatically generates the appropriate queries for the target database to update the database to represent the state of the object. Django has a really nice one that's built in to its web framework, and it would be really cool if you could split the two apart, because there's applications for that. But my understanding is that it's tightly coupled to the Django framework right now, and so if you want to use just the ORM, there's no easy way to do it currently. Maybe that's changed since the last time I looked into it, but I remember reading some stuff about it a few years ago because people wanted to do just that thing. When you say query, are you talking about a DSL? I'm not sure what a DSL is. Andrew, when you ask about when you say query, are you talking about a DSL? I don't know what a DSL is. It's or I'm forgetting. Um,
Domain-specific language, Andrew just
oh,
noted
okay.
that.
Oh, I got to scroll down. Okay. Yeah, it would probably be a domain-specific. Well, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this question. So when I say query, I'm talking about something that would be specific to VOLTTRON. So it would be like our own query language. And we would write a parser for it, and then we would take the results, the syntax analysis tree from that parser, and use it to build queries native to whatever database it is that we would be working on. Yeah, and there's actually some of us on the team have experience doing this, and it's not nearly as scary as it sounds. It's just, what do we want those queries to look like? Okay. Yeah, so it would not be like a SQL query. Yeah, we're basically right. Yes, that is correct. We would be writing a mini language spec, and yeah, and like I say, it's actually something that I've done before. I wrote a simple filtering language using a thing. Oh, I can't remember what it is. Gosh. There's a Python library that makes it really easy to do. But it's something that I've done before, and it wouldn't be a language that's like super sophisticated, but it would be simple to understand. The best analog I can think of is if you've ever used Wireshark and you've used you've punched in a filter, just described a filter string. That is actually not that hard to do if you have the background in language parsing. There's some tools that make writing mini languages like that pretty easy if you know what you're doing. And so that's what I would like to do, just because then we can make it specific to our domain and not tied to a specific database, because we really don't want it to look like SQL queries if we can help it. Especially because if we want to present this to a user, like an advanced user, on the platform, we don't want to have them to need to be familiar with SQL in order to get something out of the tagging service. And we don't want to tie the tagging service to a particular database backend. Oh, you're using MySQL instead of Postgres. Well, your SQL queries your queries are going to change like this. That's not ideal. So,
yeah, and Kyle's really good. So I'm the SQL person. I keep giving him SQL, and he keeps changing it to a mini language. So
yeah,
he's good at that.
So yeah, that's what we would like to do. And there's lots of power in a mini language, so that you can do things like, if you're writing it in a SQL query, you have to worry about resolving references yourself and handling that and understanding how the tags are stored in the database in order to accomplish that. If we write a mini language, then it's like, oh, this thing right here is this thing right here is a reference, or there's a parent-child relationship here, and I specify it this way in the mini language, and then it doesn't matter how it's stored in the database. We take care of that for you. And then that allows us to change our schema for our database if we figure out something better without breaking everybody's stuff. So that's the hope and the dream. Okay, I think have we talked enough about tagging, Jeremy? We could probably move on to the UI stuff.
Yeah. Let's move on to the UI, and so that we have time for that and ChargePoint.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Any comments, please email us, and we can follow up on email, or we can follow up at the next office hours. Which, let's see, that's a good point. The next office hours will probably be canceled because that would be Christmas, Friday before Christmas. So
yeah, and the lab, that's holiday for the lab.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, yep. Let's. Joe, are you ready to do the UI?
Sure.
Awesome. Thanks.
So do I request control? Oh, there we go. So now I can just go ahead and present.
Yeah. If you're doing it from the lab, then you should automatically be a presenter.
Yeah, present. Okay, you should get it shortly. It looks like it's there. It's real small for me. Is it real small for everybody? Wonder. how to make it bigger. Okay, Bob, you see it?
Yep,
So
looks fine to me.
looks good. Okay, great. So what I'd like to show is the current state of the development of the VOLTTRON Central web application. Particularly, we've been working to add the functionality that will allow the user to add devices and configure the devices for a platform. And I think I might have shown a little bit of this in a previous office hours. I don't recall 100%. So some of this might be familiar, but hopefully we'll have some extra progress that we can show you. So just to kind of give you a walkthrough for how this will work whenever you're in the VOLTTRON Central web application and you have your tree view over here with everything under it, you initiate the device configuration for a platform. Next, the platform is the top level, the VOLTTRON instance, and we have this configure this devices button next to it for launching the device configuration. So you click on that. Oh, by the way, that will be enabled if you have a BACnet proxy agent running. That's required for the current implementation of our device configuration, which uses the, let's see, we do a scan for BACnet devices, and the BACnet proxy agent is needed to do that scan. Later, which we haven't yet implemented, we will also allow an option that you can manually add your devices. And that way you could add devices other than BACnet types. And you would come over here and choose the add devices manually option, but that's not enabled at this point. So for now, we'll assume that you're going to do a scan for your BACnet devices. And if you have more than one BACnet proxy agent, you decide which one you're going to use. You can add some optional parameters here if you know that you're interested in devices on your network that you know what those IDs are and you want to focus on those and exclude other ones. You could put the minimum and maximum of your device ID range. There's also some other options. You could look for a specific device on your network by providing its address. And you could also say, how long do you want this scan to go on? The default, if you don't set anything, is 5 seconds. I think that is where we've got it right now. Okay, so we'll just do an open scan right now because for our scenario, we don't have a lot of devices on our network, so this will be easy enough just to go with the defaults. So this is a button here to initiate the scan. So we click on that and wait for the devices that it finds. So initially you'll see this warning at the top of the screen, and it's just letting us know that some of the devices that it found have the same ID as each other. And that is an indication that you've configured your network incorrectly. So that's just a warning, and so we can close it. You can see here where 2 of the devices both had ID of 500. So you'll probably want to avoid that situation. But if
for those of you not familiar with setting up a BACnet network, that's considered an improperly configured network, and it needs to be fixed because certain features don't work properly when you have duplicate device IDs for BACnet in general.
Right. Okay. So, but they're still recognized as separate devices with separate addresses. So we can proceed with configuring the devices. I will start with this first one at the top. And the way that we start, well, now that we've found the devices, we want to configure each one. And to do that, we're going to need to save a registry configuration file. And then we're also going to need to save a device configuration file. And this UI process will take care of those steps. So there's a couple of ways that we can create the registry configuration file. And the first approach I'll show you is we're going to pick a device and read that device. We're going to initiate a scan of that device that will then return to us all of the configuration points on the device. So to initiate that scan, we go over to one of these triangles for the device we're interested in and just click on it, and that initiates the scan. And this top device has about 700 data points on it, and so we'll wait while it's collecting those.
Oh, the points received ticker is new, and we like it. Because before it would just sit there and spin, and you didn't know if anything was going on. And then all of a sudden it would just, well,
yeah.
Would it populate? I can't remember what it did before.
It started returning rows before the scan was complete.
Yeah, and so you didn't know if it was finished.
Yeah. All right, so it found all of these data attributes, and now you can go through and edit them and select which ones you're interested in. There's a lot of options here, so I'll just kind of give you some different examples, but if I'm too into the weeds and people get the idea and I should move on, just speak up. So first and foremost, if we like all these points and we want to keep them in our registry configuration, then at the bottom of the list we can just go ahead and save. Well, we haven't selected any of the points yet, so before we can do the save, we go through and select which ones we want. And now that we've saved, say, these 4, then those are the 4 points that we've selected to go into our registry configuration. We get a preview of what we're actually going to be saving. We could also inspect that in a CSV format, which is a little harder to read, but this is actually what the data will be saved as in the registry configuration file. Before I perform that, let me back up and show you a few more of the things you can do. So we want to give you ways that you can deal with this super huge list of points. And one thing that you can do, well, first of all, if we want all the points, you don't have to select them one at a time. So we can just click on the top and it grabs everything. And then say, well, there's just a few that we know we're not interested in, so now it's easy to subtract those. If, on the other hand, we wanted to get rid of everything except for a few, well, let's see. Yeah. Then what we could do is a reverse selection. So right now, 90% of the points are selected, and we can say get rid of all of those. And so what this is a warning that says you're about to delete all of these points. Are you sure you want to do that? And I think I'll go ahead and say yes. And so now we have a really reduced list of points to deal with. Another thing that we can do without actually deleting all of them would be to perform a filter. And so this would find whatever we're searching for, such as if we just want to find anything with the word econo in it, okay, it found these, or it reduced it to this one, and we can make changes to it, and we haven't actually changed the list, so then we can cancel the filter and realize that we still have all the points there. I think I got a response, so I'm going to take a look at that. Oh, okay, thanks, Andrew. And we could also do find and replace, where instead of just filtering down to the rows that we've searched for, we could actually make a change. So this find and replace found the row with the word econo in it, and instead of econo, maybe we want to change it to something else. And so now that was a quick way that we could make that change. And if we have the super huge list of all the points, then you can really get some bang for your buck there. We could also add more points that weren't in the initial list returned from the device. And if we save that, now it's added to the list. We could, let's see, these actions with the that I select from the edit pencil apply to this column. So any find and replace that I do will be in that column. I could also just duplicate this entire row and so now it created an entire column that was a copy of the first one, and we can configure that one separately. We could also delete that column that we just made. And we only show you the columns, the attributes that we think you're going to need to interact with the most for your configuration, but there are additional hidden rows for each one that you can also interact with through this pop-up window. You could also say, well, you know what, I really do want to see the index for all of my columns, so you can just say there to add that column. So hopefully this is a useful, handy way to edit your registry configuration. Let's go ahead and proceed with saving one of our files, or saving our configuration. So for now, I'll say I'm interested in these 4 points. So in order to save my registry configuration, I need to give it a name for the registry configuration file for that CSV file and say save that. So that registry configuration is now saved, and it takes me to the next step, which is to set up the device configuration. And this will be the device configuration for the device that I just created that registry file for. So I think this was called at Unit 2, so we'll stick with that and provide some of these other settings. And Bob asked if these go into the config store directly, and the answer to that, Kyle, correct me if I'm wrong, the answer is yes, it does go directly into the configuration store.
Let's see. When you hit save?
Yes. Yeah, so I'm about to save the device configuration.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and now that's done.
Craig would actually know the answer to that question, but I believe the answer is yes.
Yeah. So we've saved the registry configuration file and the device configuration file for that device. So that device is officially added to the platform, to the platform. And you'll see that the registry edit table has changed a little bit, because now some of the rows have been changed, and that indicates which ones we've saved into the device that we just configured. So again, when we have that big old list of 700 points, this might be a way that will help us keep track if we're going to set up more than one device from those points, which I understand is a use case that will be happening a lot. You've scanned for one of the devices that was detected, but the fact is, out of all those 700 points, you may need to be configuring several sub-devices under that. And so our workflow here hopefully lets you do that. Another feature to show you is, well, you've made all these changes to these points, but maybe whenever you did that deletion to remove a bunch of rows, you realized that you removed something that you want to get back. Well, you could do two things. One is you could start over your process, but relaunch the scanning and redetect your devices, and then rescan the device for the points. You can do that. But a new feature as well is once you scan a device to get the points initially, then you can also always go back to the original points that are on that device. And doing that will overwrite basically what you've got showing up in your table right now. So we ask you if you're sure that's what you want to do, and we say yes. There was a lot of points there, so it takes just a few moments to pull them all back. But as you can see, we've got all of the points from the original scan, and we didn't have to sit there and wait for a minute or so. There's a couple of other ways. You don't have to just scan the device in order to create the registry configuration. You could also select this option, which will bring up the registry configuration files that we have already created that are, this goes to Bob's question about the config store, because these registry configuration files are in the config store, and so we could reselect them. Oh, that was a different one. That's not the one I just did. I did the second one, didn't I? Okay, and so that's the one that we just created. So now we could use it again for another device, and we would go ahead and save all of them, give it a new name. Now some of the device configuration values that we provided are auto-populated because chances are that we're still working on the same campus and building. So this time we can do Unit 3 and save that. So hopefully that'll go quicker. And the other option is if you have a registry configuration file, a CSV file on your machine, not in the config store, but just saved to your computer, then you can use the file selector, and and then you can navigate to wherever that is. Let's just choose this one, and we get a warning in this case because we're missing some of the required columns that need to be in your registry configuration file. So we say okay, and then we can work on it and make sure that it's correct. So that is how the VOLTTRON Central user interface will let you configure your devices. The end goal for that, like I said, the two devices, Unit 2 and Unit 3 that I just configured, now should be recognized by your platform. And we've got a little bit more work to do. What we want to happen, and will happen with just a little bit more effort, is whenever you save both your registry configuration and your device configuration file, then the VOLTTRON Central user interface will update automatically and recognize that. And over here, you'll be able to see your device added under the correct building. And this is Unit 1 that was done previously, for example, and all of its points are under it. these are the points from the registry configuration. And notice this wrench icon next to the device. That will be the button that allows you to go back into one of these files that you just created and make further changes if you need to. And so that would be how you can re-edit the registry configuration file. You would click on this and choose whichever one you want to work on, and that will bring you back to over to here, and you can use a similar process to make your updates. And I'll go ahead and refresh the screen. It could be that our devices that I just did will show up. Now that I've shown you essentially everything that I have to show you, we'll just see if it worked. You shouldn't have to refresh your page. We're going to have WebSockets that will detect the devices that you add and insert them in the proper place in the tree. And so here are the two devices that I just created. So I think that's about as much as I can show you at this time.
Cool.
If there are any questions, or Jeremy or Kyle.
Well, thanks for that. Yeah, if there's any questions, let us know. As Joe said, we're continuing to finish this up. I
have a question. This is Bob.
Okay.
Or did you questions now or later?
Oh, I was just going to give you time to quickly talk about ChargePoint, but if you have a question, go for it.
Oh, well, I was thinking about this relative to the ChargePoint work. So, we have a task to create a script to generate device configs in the registry, CSV. But this is really slick. The VOLTTRON Central. Is this at a point where we could try and hook in the ChargePoint configuration into this UI as well?
So right now, what we're doing is dependent on the capabilities of BACnet. But Joe, could you maybe talk about how, like, if you had some other option for setting up a driver through here, where that would go?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with ChargePoint. Is that a device or a device of a non-BACnet type?
Yeah, it's an electric vehicle charging station protocol. Mm-hmm. So it would be a completely different driver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so that gets at what I was saying is down the road just a little bit. It's not going to be part of our next release. The next release we do in the next few weeks will be just what I showed as far as scanning for BACnet objects. But the other option that will come shortly after that will be then to add a device manually, and that you should be able to add a device of any non-BACnet type, I believe.
I'm just wondering how the interface will work. So right now, when we've implemented ChargePoint as a driver under master driver, so we've got an interface class and register types. Do you anticipate having like additional methods on interface that would be invoked by the UI so that you could do some of these different things, or so that it would be generic for any new driver types that are added, or
are you talking about just adding that device and configuring it, or are you talking about beyond that and interacting with the device?
No, adding the device and configuring it.
Mm-hmm.
So indicating that you want to search for points, like you just showed us at BACnet. We have that same thing that we need to do for the ChargePoint device.
So how would you search for the ChargePoint ones? You'd get your account information and ping the web service and see what stations it returns or something like that?
Exactly, yeah. So we could ping one station and see what data we get back for each of the API calls, and then come up with a list of all the available points.
Yeah. I think the framework could be, I think we could work with you to see how we would do that with this. Because one of the main goals with this is that we're building a UI, but we're not aiming for a commercial level slick user interface. We are really interested in the services underneath of it, and so that people can build their own UI if they want to. but what Joe has is leaps and bounds better than setting things up manually.
Yeah, it's pretty slick.
So it's great that we have this. It's good job, Joe and Craig. But yeah, so I think we could work with you to think about what it would mean to do that, because we've thought about Modbus, and with Modbus you can't auto discover anything. It would purely be manual setup through the UI, and
Right.
ChargePoint would be at least a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, really, I think the process that Joe just showed is very similar to what we assumed we were going to do for ChargePoint, except do it through scripts. So I think it's pretty similar to the BACnet process you just showed us.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, let's we can start talking about
Okay.
start talking about how we would do that with ChargePoint. That sounds good.
Okay.
That'd be great to have another driver type in here.
Mhm.
Okay. Cool.
And then as far as ChargePoint goes, should we just plan to present at the next office hours, or we probably need at least 10 minutes to really cover it?
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe we can do that. It won't be till January, so I don't know if you want to talk real quick about it. Maybe the lightning talk version of things, I guess.
Yeah, well, sure. We can just real quick. So we're working on Slack and Keysense. We're working on 2 projects on VOLTTRON. One is really all about implementing protocol support, and the first protocol that we're adding support for is the ChargePoint Services API, which is a protocol that allows you to control ChargePoint charging stations. And it sounds like our pull request has already been merged. We could really quickly just show you where the documentation is, and then folks could look around. But in platform specifications, there's a ChargePoint API spec that we wrote a month ago. And then and now in the driver documentation, there's a section on how to configure the ChargePoint driver itself. So there's documentation for that, and it just shows you how to set up the device configuration, what parameters you need for each device, and then how to set up the registry CSV for a charge station. But we can go through more detail on that next time. I'll walk through it.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Have a good Christmas and New Year's and any other holidays, and we will talk to everybody in January.
Later.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.